Good morning, Baraitsu. This is Oabona Kgengwenyane from Manenzo Farming and InnoLead Consulting. Let me just start by saying all protocol observed. I'm not too sure who's there, but please accept all my respect to all of you. And welcome to Botswana Botle and all the farmers here and all the stakeholders who have been supportive to farming in Botswana. What a potential. Now, my topic this morning is transforming Botswana's agri landscape. Has our leadership got the appetite? So this is the big question, because in my consulting space, when you talk about performance of an organization, performance of a country, or any other entity, performance is dependent on the quality of leadership. The performance of an organization never exceeds that of the capability of the leadership. So that is the big question. That is why, instead of focusing on value chains, I rebelled against the point team by looking at policy level, so that we can see, because there's no point getting a tactical level of our farming landscape when the policy and the leadership level is still faulty or is not optimal. That is why I want to focus at that level. As I said, everything starts with leadership. But first, let me say that I am also a farmer. I've been a farmer now for about 14 years. So I've been in the game. I have had the blood and sweat. And as a lot of people say, farming is not for the faint-hearted, especially for some of us who are first-generation farmers in terms of the medium to large scale for which I'm involved with. 2 generations ago, my grandfather, Oabona Kgengwenyane, who is the one who really motivated me to carry on with the heritage of the family in terms of farming, was a good farmer during the days in Barolong Farms. You'll all recall that Barolong Farms was called the grain basket of Botswana in the 70s and 80s. But things happened and the whole industry, if you may, in Barolong Farms collapsed. My grandfather was a farmer. There were other farmers in the area in Barolong Farms, Borre Seleka, Borre Stuke, Bokamfore, and so on. And it was indeed an industry. I recall passionately and affectionately how we used to grow maize, how we used to do groundnuts, sonobrom or sunflower as you call it, and everything will be harvested. Where we had all the machines for working on all the produce and all the tractors with trailers loading all the products to those silos in Pitame. So those are some of the things. And also he had cattle, he had small stock that we used to look after at the time, a couple of hundred of cattle at the time. So although he was semi-illiterate, he was an entrepreneur who ran a farming business. So those are the things that we got inspiration. And I know Botswana ka bontsi, we take inspiration from our heritage because we are people of the earth. Our grandparents were working the earth. And my cornerstone of my presentation today is that when I picture that scenario of the 70s and 80s when I was a young boy, part of a farming community in Barolong Farms, it's sad to see that the farming practices today, some of them are still not even to the quality of what our grandfathers did. So there's something really to reflect around that. After 50 years of farming and talking about farming in Botswana, we still haven't gotten to where we really need to be as a country, especially a country fueled by the precious stones in terms of diamonds, whereby by now we should to be more innovative, to build technologies and actually build a very robust agricultural sector. So as I said, I've been hit by drought as a farmer, a very, very stark situation in Botswana when you face drought. We faced the 2017-18 drought, where as a farmer, when you have to put your heifers on a truck and take them for slaughter, then things were bad and get really, really terrible prices. I won't even mention. And also in Sandveld, where we farm, our business gets eaten up by the lions. So we've got wildlife that roams, obviously, from the CKGR that comes into our farm. So we had, wild dogs, we've had hyenas, we've got lions, as I said, that come and feed on stock. So we also have issues, obviously, with the conflict between game and our farming practices. The roads, I'll talk a bit about infrastructure. I've been stuck on the roads after punctures, no telecom, nothing in these bad roads that are really terrible when you talk about our farming landscape. So these are the things that really make it very difficult. That is why I say in the end it starts with leadership. And I think in terms of leadership, and yeah, sometimes you unfairly just look at our political leadership, but we can't run away from political leadership because they are the ones who set the tone. They are the ones who set the laws, who set the policy. So, but as the electrodes, as private sector, as activists in the farming, we have to influence our leaders to do the right thing. And I can sit here and say, in terms of Maduo and really getting results in our agriculture sector has not been good. And as an analyst and as a leadership, someone who speaks on leadership and research on leadership, I can categorically say that it is because of the quality of our leadership that we have not made inroads. And for years, we've talked about how, by around independence in the 60s, agriculture used to contribute 40% to GDP, and now we're talking about 4%. Obviously, all this is skewed by the diamonds. But in the end, we definitely have dropped in terms of productivity when it comes to farming. So we really depend on the psychology of the African leader. And I'm saying the African leader because part of my presentation will also be at Africa level, because in the end, the challenges that we face are just not Botswana as a pocket, but they're also Africa at large. One Prime Minister of Australia once said that good policy is good politics. And sometimes you get derailed by these 5-year cycles for politicians who sometimes cajole us into programs that are not really helpful to productivity, but those programs ingrain some level of inefficiencies and even dependency syndromes in our people instead of really going commercial. So this is extremely important to really underscore how important our leaders are. Now, in terms of opportunities, there's numerous studies from global organizations, from the World Bank, from Africa Development Bank, and the opportunities in Africa are really humongous, to borrow the word. Africa is home to 65% of required arable land to feed 9 billion people by 2050. So I just want to pause there and imagine that how many millionaires and even billionaires that we can build by people participating commercially. And this is where also, with our huge land mass in Botswana, and we apply the right level of technology and innovation, we can actually be able to leverage our land. So 65% of arable land that can produce for this 9 billion sits in Africa. Also, Africa imports 35 billion worth of agricultural or food from the rest of the world. 35 billion annually. So again, just pause and see if we replace those imports. I was reading somewhere where a lot of countries in Kenya, in South Africa, they still get things like just poultry from Brazil. We get butter from Europe. I mean, very expensive entities. Issues and policy matters that even impact on our physical stability as countries in Africa. Because if we produce our own stuff, we'll even assist to make sure that even our countries become more sustainable in terms of our development agenda. So I just like to underscore how the opportunities that sit in agriculture, and is much been said around the world. So in terms of what's happening around in terms of at leadership level, first, I think there's a general alignment that agriculture plays a critical role. I listened to the I think it's the chairman of the Africa Development Bank, to AU and African leaders, the ministers in agriculture. Everybody talks about, including Botswana, we talk about how important agriculture is. The issue is, are we putting our money where our mouths are? That's the big question. And also, agricultural sector is preoccupied at ground zero level by what you can call almost no names. These are the people that are almost forgotten. These are the poorest, the most unskilled people. For some reason, even if we say this is a very important sector. So that's the landscape. We have the people that the majority of our people who are poor, they're actually still there toiling the soils, however unproductive it is. And my cornerstone is that really after 60 years of independence in Africa, and we still cannot have food security with some of the most fertile countries that are there. I mean, when you talk Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, I mean, the rains that are there, we should not be having such a huge import bill. And my take is that there's really no freedom when a country cannot feed itself. And again, I'd like you to underline this. There's no proper freedom. And you recall during COVID when we almost got stuck because we relied on supply chains that were linked to South Africa and we couldn't get certain foods. I mean, that's really a risk, almost on the edges of existential risk. So in terms of technology and innovation, you have to drive and go around the country to see how even our crop industry, our animal industry, how unproductive and how lack of application of technologies really is all over the show. And wasteful programs, I sometimes believe, although they're done in goodwill, I'm for one who believes that agriculture needs to be subsidized, just like globally, that's a common practice. But where it goes to the extent of actually wasting the limited resources that we have, and that is why today we find Botswana in a crunch in terms of the economic crunches that we have. We've got to look at how every tere, every pula actually produces. That's why in our farming practice, when I talk to my team and our manager, we talk about how we can leverage or optimize pula per hectare. This is, whether you apply technology, whether whatever farming practices, you got to make sure that you really maximize on those hectares that you've got. And also, just as I said earlier, do we have the political will to really change? I mean, the sort of things that we spend on other things and the tone that we give to agriculture, is there a correlation? And I wish to challenge you to say, I don't think there's adequate correlation. That is why some of you, the whole ululation and the whole new dawn that's euphoria around Botswana in terms of the June government, I'm sure like you, I'm also looking forward to see how they're going to approach this agricultural sector that needs to really to be transformed. Now, I don't want to sound like a doomsday guy. There could be, and there are things that are happening in Botswana that are really goodies. First, in spite of all these programs that I talked about that sometimes do more damage, there has been intentional government expenditure on agricultural programs and also making really a big fuss around agriculture. The hype has been on, especially for the last 10 years. That of recent, we're talking about Temolo, we're talking about Chema, and all those type of things. And most of them actually around agricultural sector. You can go back to the RDEP days, East Part, all those create a hype around agriculture. So the hype has been there in terms of agriculture being part of that agenda. We also have the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which for me, it really facilitate access because Africa, we need to trade together. As a cattle farmer, and I hope the livestock farmers in the house agree with me, our biggest challenge in Botswana is feed, is nutrients that comes from all the mixes that we buy from these shops, with a lot of them coming from South Africa. And you'll agree with me that countries like Zimbabwe, like Zambia, they're very good for grain production, for instance, or soya, or some of the stuff that we need for our cattle. Now, if we can loosen up, if Africa Trade Agreement comes to play and it makes it easy for us to access, the roads are also good so that it doesn't become expensive to bring this feed in. It will really make a big difference to our productivity levels here. And also government move to get out of business. I farm in Banyana, and Banyana, as you know, was a government entity, was a parastatal that was hived off. There were adverts, we tendered for the farms, and some of us and other people even outside the country managed to secure these farms. And I can tell you now that the productivity at Banyana farms is much better than when government was doing it. That I can assure you. We also have Kwenantle in the Tuli block where they're doing grain production, a very, very good example of what you can do with a piece of land, which is again almost a PPP arrangement between a private sector and government. So those have been good developments that we have to keep them going. There's also pockets of excellence in terms of entrepreneurs, and I will be doing injustice if I don't mention this. Like the Pandamatenga Grain Hub. I mean, I've been there. I've been quite marveled, seeing 3,000 hectares of sorghum and what those entrepreneurs are doing there in terms of the farming community. Excellent soils, as you know, in terms of the nutrients of the soils there. And in my view, why can't we just 10x the place, 10x the volumes, if advertised for citizens and even outside, so that we can produce for export? So this is Pandamatenga for me has been a success story. Few world-class livestock breeders. We know recently we are celebrating one of our farmers, Mr. Clive Marshall, who's one of his cows, and he's been doing it now for over 10 years, won a prize at South Africa Agriculture Research Council in terms of the competition that goes on there around breeding. We have the Mangas near Francistown. We have the Stalakhosi brothers, Grandin, Skater with Doppers, Kenneth Matsuri with the red animals down there in near Tsabong. We have Wamonti Chepe. So we have talent, and all I want us to do is, if we can scale this, the sky is the limit. And I'm very happy that people like Clive, people like the Mangas are even exporting to the region, which is what we all strive for. And also, I talked about the Kwananta Irrigation Farm, which I think is getting to 1,000 hectares of center pivots, which is, again, I've been there, and it's a very good example of how we can, again, be very productive if we're intentional about things. There is obviously the new citrus farm in the Tuli Marinari area, which also is quite a good development. Now, let me just focus a little bit on what I see as the dark side of Botswana. And let me just mention dark side. I mean, again, it's a bit gloom and doom, but it's really to highlight those fundamental structural problems with our farming in Botswana. Good people, we are now going into December. It's November, going into December, and we have a farm in the Sandveld, as I said. We also have a farm in Banyana. And up to date, I think we can estimate that we haven't had over 15 millimeters of rain. The veld is still looking dry. When it rains 5 millimeters the following week, the heat is intense. So climate vulnerability is a critical issue. And I'd like to appeal to the farming community, even our policy, to say we cannot keep mentioning and saying drought every year in Botswana. We are a drought country, which actually should be celebrating rather a year that is not drought. I recall, the days of Ramasire, the day of Ramohai, when they kept mentioning drought. I think we have to that's a mindset change that needs to happen about how we approach this. Also, over the last 30 years, rainfall has been dropping at an average of 1 millimeters year on year. This is a study that was done by University of Botswana. So this is a concern where rainfall is coming down, the sun is intensifying, and as the experts say, this could be the cause of climate change. So climate change is a reality, drought is here, and that is why we have to intensify our innovation and adoption of climate smart strategies. Land degradation. A study by one of our development partners in Botswana concluded that 40% of Botswana agricultural land is degraded, which limits the usage and hampering food production for sure. And some of you will agree with me. You drive around Botswana, especially in our communal lands, the level of soil erosion, the level of overgrazing and overstocking that happens. I don't know why this is not something of a national concern, because this will affect our future in terms of food security for the country. Unskilled labor. I just don't know how we can have a country that talks high of education and we still have very much rudimentary. Really, some of the old ones have even not finished primary school level. And this is from experience. And then we have kids who don't do well in Form 2 who end up in the farms. And we've got hundreds. We've discussed in our farming groups how this is very depressing to see young people dropping from school at a young age, which talks about the education system, which is a different subject as well. But this, in terms of education and the unskilled labor, and I'm talking at an artisan level, because in Botswana, we've got the PhD people, we've got all those, but my take is that we need the artisan level practitioners that can help really manage our farms in a modern way. So education is a big issue that I'd really like to highlight. Poor levels of infrastructure. Roads, water, power, telco. Sandveld is a good example. Hundreds of farms. And we still have a road that every time I have to go to the farm, I have to think twice. There are a number of animals that we've lost being tracked from our farms to the BMC. I mean, I've lost dozens of animals which die along the way just because of the quality of our road. So my appeal, and during Farmers Association, these annual meetings, we talk about infrastructure, but it just doesn't seem to happen. And then lastly, the lack of R&D. Technology adoption is critical. And I've read Ministry of Agriculture documents, and they did also confirm that the level of R&D at the ministry is lacking. So I'll just again say, and our neighbors, I mean, South Africa with the Agricultural Research Council and the level of intensity in terms of research at the universities, we even adopt some of their animals. And the Dopper was made in South Africa. We know about the Botswana cattle. All these are due to research, going back to the 50s when your Botswanas were created. So it's important, whether crop, livestock, aqua, to really focus on R&D, and we need R&D at the ministry level, even at farm level, in terms of what you do to research. So in terms of that, let me just continue with some of the most unfortunate. I think consistent poor performance. I mean, the cattle numbers are falling, partly because of the drought. Calving rates are poor, especially obviously in the communal areas. We've been talking about calving rates of 40%. So this is just an indication of the level of poor productivity that's there, and also just poor practices that we do, whether it's crop or livestock. Misguided priorities. I'm the chairman of Milk Africa. Where we're trying to get to 2000, and we've been struggling for the past 5 years to get milk animals into Botswana, so that we can be able to get the pala working. And, we've been, the Milk Africa is owned by BDC, and as a chairman, I've been lobbying that we try and get milking cows from elsewhere in the world. Obviously very expensive because of FMD in South Africa, we can't get those. And then there came the bulls from the USA, where there was, this acquisition of animals from the USA. And I was saying, milk, almost 9, we are not, the food security where we're exposed around milk is amazing. We import almost 90% of our requirements around milk. And for me, getting milking cows into the country will have been much more important. I tried to lobby, I did not succeed. But it's just the misguided priorities in terms of how we approach some of these things. So I would just again, to really prioritize in terms of how we want to approach farming in Botswana. Misguided subsidies, I talked about the dependency syndrome, which counter entrepreneurship culture which we much need in Botswana. And also just reluctance to focus on large-scale agriculture for export. I think we need to change gear from these sort of social programs to more large-scale export, and like the citrus. We've got pockets of it, as I said, in livestock, the citrus, the Pandamatengas. I think we've got the land mass, and we got to study and see that we don't get accidental initiatives like all of a sudden farmers come from South Africa and they do potatoes in Hansi. Where is our research? Where is our innovation? Where is our spatial, where we should have done the soil studies, the water studies, the climate studies, and say, what is the ideal crop inventory or crop types that are ideal for Botswana? What is the ideal livestock that's that? Is it Simmental? Is the Brahman? Are those really appropriate for a type of climate here in Botswana? So I just like to add in terms of land use to say the other thing is we are not really using our land use properly. In Botswana, we still have thousands of hectares dedicated to inefficient and unproductive communal and subsistence farming. We always take pride saying BMC 80% comes from a communal, which is 40% calving rate. And I say, with the amount of land that we expose to communal, that's degrading, is really an efficient way of using our land. And all these 5 and 10 hectares that we have across the country that are not de-weeded, that don't have fertilizer, and so forth. So this culture of having 1 ton per hectare in terms of maize versus what world class in, whether it's in Brazil, whether it's the US, they get 15 tons per hectare in production. These are the type of stuff we should be measuring in terms of how we are productive and and applying relevant technology. So studies have shown that Africa use of fertilizer needs to increase by 8 times. So it's almost 10 times we need for us to be productive. And the hybrid seed adoption might also grow by 6 times in terms of the right seeds that we need for our climate. Now, let me conclude by looking at some of the interventions just for a takeaway for the conference. One, we need to look at renewable energy solutions, good people. I think there's so much talk about how Botswana is ideal for solar, but in terms of the level of intensity of doing something, and it's ideal for farming because farming is all over the country. We can have off-grid setups where we are able to supply the farms. BPC has been a bit of a hindrance because you need to know before, but all the tones and the says that I've heard from the new government is that we'll be allowed to do off-grid. So that's a huge opportunity in terms of climate-smart agriculture. Advanced precision agriculture technologies. You cannot farm without knowing the soil type appropriate for what you're growing. This is just basic agriculture 101, even primary school stuff. So we should stop doing that because it is wasteful. Strengthen education and training, especially around artisans. We need schools that will teach all the farm workers around animal and incentives for the farmers, because something that's bizarre for me is that you see farmers sitting with this uneducated stuff and actually don't seem to be perturbed. So we need to make sure that we have a little revolution around the education for our farm workers. So implementing sustainable water management practices. Obviously, water is a big problem in Botswana. We need to have a way of saying, how do we promote irrigation around Botswana? How do we make sure that we have quality water that can be used for farming from a total point of view, not just looking at your tulip block I know we've had dam programs and all that. We've got to look at globally from a country perspective. Land rehabilitation and sustainable use of land, enhancing market access for products. We talked about Africa Free Trade, commercial agriculture acceleration program. We need to identify those farmers that are ready to do blood and sweat and actually scale up their practices for export so that we can contribute to this much desired 10% GDP growth as said by our new president, Reboko. Agriculture sector data mapping and AI strategy. It's very difficult to get data on Botswana farming so that you can be able to derive or develop your business properly. We also need to endorse and adopt technologies like AI so that you're able to know, well, if I've got this piece of land in the middle of Central District, this is the data around that specific area, and this is the ideal type of crop that I need to plant there, and this is the ideal water and so forth. AI makes that quite democratizes that type of setup. High-tech horticulture, hydroponics. We should not having horticulture where you put your tomatoes way in the open when we know how harsh our climate is. Infrastructure development program, I cannot underscore this. There's an amazing agriculture integrated agro-commercial development project which has been talked about there. Your Sandveld, your Molopo, all these clusters of Tulu, we got to have good access roads so that we can make them efficient. Investment in R&D, I think I've oversaid this in terms of where we can apply, mobile soil testing, smart irrigation, blockchain technologies to make sure, and even robotics in agriculture, we can improve our. So in conclusion, good people, and thanks very much for listening. Food security is true independence. Food security is true independence, and that's really my message to you. We need to have a measure shift from this social subsistence to commercial and high-end oriented type farming. That's the only way we can be able to contribute to accelerated GDP as desired by our principals and government. And the ball is within the political leadership and also us as farmers. But in terms of policy, in terms of direction, in terms of where we put our money, obviously the political leadership needs to play the part, as I said to Master. So quality of our leadership has to scale. And I'm hoping that with the new government, with the new young people who are going into farming, we can have a major revolution in terms of how we do farming here in Botswana. So thank you very much for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And I really look forward to seeing some of you outside the conference facilities. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Pula bagaetso.